Independence Hall, that opened through donations of the public in 1987, collects, preserves, and exhibits resources about how people overcame the national crisis and the history of national development. We're going to give you an overview of the exhibition halls. The ordeal of the Korean People Hall shows the reality of Japanese colonialism following the failure of developing into a modern independent country during the Joseon dynasty because of the Japanese invasion. In this hall, you can get a sense of how desperately people wanted their independence under Japanese occupation. Japan invaded Ganghwa with a gunboat Yunyoho in 1875 to open the ports of Korea, and as a result, forced Korea to enter into an unequal treaty, the Treaty of Ganghwa. In November 1905, Japan deprived the Korean Empire of its diplomatic rights by force and threat without any procedures or formalities based on international law. This is proved by the absence of title and the emperor's approval on the Ulsa illegal treaty document. On August 22, 1910, the Korea-Japan Annexation Treaty was finalized by Terauchi Masatake, the third General Viscount, and Lee Wan-yong, the former Prime Minister of the Korean Empire. The treaty was proclaimed to the public on August 29th, a week later, and the Korean Empire fell under Japanese colonial rule. Struggles for National Rights Hall is where you can gain insight into the history of the movement by learning about people's participation in the March 1st movement and the mass struggles they participated in. Koreans resisted Japanese rule and declared Joseon's independence, shouting out for Korean independence while demonstrating. The Korean Declaration of Independence, which proclaimed the liberty of Joseon and its people, was used for March 1st movement. The Korean flags displayed here were used during the March 1st independence movement. The government established and proclaimed the Korean flag as an official flag for the nation in 1883, but many different Korean flags were used since they never decided on a specific design for it. In the patriotic struggle for National Independence Hall, you can learn about the anti-Japanese armed resistance carried out by Korean people fighting for the independence of the country, both within Korea and overseas. At a celebration of a Japanese war victory held at Lushan Park in Shanghai, the patriot Yoon Bong-gil set off a bomb, which resulted in the deaths of Japanese dignitaries and government leaders who played key roles in the invasion of Korea and China. In September 1940, Korea Independence Army was established in Chungcheong, China, as an armed force of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea. Korean Independence Army recruited, educated, and trained Korean soldiers and young Korean men from the Japanese Army, and went behind enemy lines to collect information as well as spread confusion amongst the Japanese Army. It carried out a joint operation with the Allies, following the Provisional Government's declaration of war against Japan immediately after the Pacific War. In the Establishing a Great Korea Hall, You can gain insight into the efforts of the Korean people and their activities to stand against Japanese rule to found a new country. Japan forced Korean people to assimilate as Japanese and speak Japanese as their mother tongue. However, members of Korean Language Society wouldn't submit to this and created the manuscripts of the Comprehensive Korean Dictionary, 조선어 큰 사전, from 1929 to 1942. The Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea was founded on April 11th as a result of the March 1st movement in 1919. It was the first government organization for the independence movement advocating the idea that Korea belonged first and foremost to its people. A docent tour is available to further your understanding of the independence movement history of Korea in foreign languages, English, Japanese, and Chinese. The docent-led tour will help you gain an in-depth knowledge of this period in history. We hope you will visit us soon.